So I left India. My destination was actually at that point to go to Burma. But when I went to the airport to fly to Burma, it was possible. I had a visa to go there, and it was possible to get into Burma at that time. But the day that I was flying out to go there, either the Burmese government or the U.S. government closed the gates. They didn't want any Americans going in there. And I was really disappointed because I had done some study about some of the temples there that I wanted to see. But anyway, I never got there. But my next stop was the Philippines. And I went into Manila. My mom had written me that a girl that I had gone, I didn't go to school with her, but a girl who was my age that was a friend or the daughter of one of my mother's friends, a girl I knew quite well, had married a banker, an international banker, and they had just moved to Manila. And she said, be sure to look her up. So when I got there, I called, and she and her husband said, well, why don't you join us for dinner? So they selected a restaurant, and we went to dinner there. It was a very upscale, sophisticated restaurant. It's a coat and tie type of arrangement. And the banker was extremely well dressed. He was a very wealthy man, in fact. But anyway, we go through the door. We're met by two men that are dressed in tuxedos. And one of the men says to the banker, are you prepared to check in? And the banker said, yes. And he said, well, if you'll just step over to this counter. And I thought, I wonder what that's all about. So he walks over to the counter, and I noticed he opened his coat, and he reached in and took something out of the pocket inside his coat. I couldn't see what it was, and laid it on the counter, and then received a receipt, which he put in his pocket, and we went on in. And I said, after we sat down, I said, I hope I'm not being too personal here, but it was interesting to watch you check in. What was all that about? Oh, he said, well, you're not allowed to have your gun in the restaurant. You have to check in. You have to leave your gun at the counter so you don't have it when you get in there. Well, that was a new one for me. Frankly, I'd never known anybody that carried a gun. And then to find out that people did carry guns, and I'm sure the wealth of Manila, because of the political instability, felt a need for that, and that there were rules on how you could use that gun. So anyway, they had to check in their gun. Now, it turned out that my friend, the young woman who was married to the banker, she didn't have a gun, so she didn't have to check in. But that gave me kind of an interesting sense of some of the political instability that they would experience in the Philippines. But I'd seen that in Libya as well. I remember going to the desert one day in a company Volkswagen bus. The driver was taking me out to Benina Airport, and there was a lot of unrest in the city. So anyway, on that trip, the driver said to me as we started to go down one of the main streets in Benghazi, he said, get down, get down. And I looked up and I noticed there were all these people on the street. They were men, there were no women. And they all had farming implements like shovels and hoes and rakes, and I guess some might have even had weapons, I don't know. But they were all yelling and screaming, and we had to go through that. And he said, whatever you do, stay down. So we did, and I got to the airport okay. I remember coming back on another occasion from the desert for a week off in Benghazi, and somebody said, did you notice the front of the building? And I hadn't. And he said, well, look at it closely. Well, there was machine gun divots in the stonework on the front of our staff house. So while I was gone, there was some action in the city. The whole point was that this was really interesting because as an American, I'd never experienced open revolt, protesting, violent protests, and things of that sort. But as I traveled around, I began to see that that is common in many places, unfortunately. While I was there, I didn't have a lot of time, but I had worked with some men when I was in high school. I worked for a contractor, and a lot of the men on the concrete crew had been in World War II. And some of those had been in the Pacific theater, and some of them talked about corregidor. I really didn't know much about it. But anyway, the word and name corregidor is on my mind because of stories they told when they'd been in the South Pacific. At any rate, when I was in Manila, I think I asked the banker, I said, is corregidor far from here? No, he said, you can visit it if you wish. And I don't remember, I think corregidor may have been on an island. All this escapes me, but I remember going there, and I'm pretty certain we went by boat, even if it was on the mainland. But anyway, we got down to corregidor, and what I do remember was absolutely fascinating. The island itself was honeycombed with caves. Not a whole lot, but there were a lot of them. And these caves went back into the outcropping rock on the sea side face of the island. And there were railroad tracks that went back into each of those caves. But what was so outstanding, I'd never seen anything like it, were these gigantic guns, huge. I have no idea what the diameter of the projectile would have been. I'll bet it would have been a foot. It would have thrown out a shell that is a foot in diameter. I'm not sure of that. But here were these gigantic guns. They were on railroad cars, and they could be hidden back in the cave or they could be brought out at will, and were part of the defense system there for the Philippines. Just a lot of really interesting things to see, and makes you think